Okay, so welcome to Forestry 521. This is recreation behavior in wildland environments. And with a class size as small as this, we can be fairly nimble to what your particular theses or dissertations are. So we'll take a minute here coming up to go through the class list and see what everybody's doing research on, and see how we might sort of tailor or customize the class to fit your needs, and in particular, where you are in your process of research. So your needs might be pretty different if you're a PhD student versus a master's student. That's okay. That's not any kind of a hobble for this class. It helps us customize and pick and choose and say yes to important things, and even more importantly, say no to things that are good but not right for this class composition. Okay? So in order to get to that point, let's go through the other biographical info. I am Dr. Logan Park. Good to meet you. My office is in the last cluster on the lakeward side of this hallway down towards Thompson Woods. I'm in 194D as in Delta. And this semester, since it's the spring, I'll be in my office most Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 4 p.m. and a whole bunch of other times as well. But really just catch me by text message, or if it's less urgent, email or something like that. And we can meet sort of whenever. The office hours are just a starting point for that. If you do send me a text message, that's totally fine and welcome. Let me know your name so I know who I'm talking to and the context of our conversation, and I can help you best in that way. You've also got my email address. And if you have any individualized learning or mobility or other accessibility issues as it reflects in this class, I'm happy to work with any of that stuff. If you need a note taker or extra time on class exercises or anything like that, that's totally fine and also protected by law. So we want to make sure that you have access to those resources if you need them. That's all through the Achieve office. And if that is you probably already know that stuff, so give them a call and we'll get that all set up. The purpose of this class, with that preamble aside, we are going to review sociological and psychological, in particular behavioral psychological theories relevant to outdoor recreation planning. So this is a field of professional practice that deals with people in the hundreds of thousands to tens of millions. In my work with national parks, for example, 5 or 6 million visitors a year is a lot. And if even 1% of those visitors are aiming to misbehave while they're on site at that national park, that's tens of thousands of people, and that's a real problem. Those impacts can stack up very quickly. So that's my field, recreation ecology. What are the ecological consequences of humans interacting and behaving and existing in recreation-protected environments and ecosystems? And we're going to try to connect through from theory to practice in this class. We're going to start out the semester talking about major psychology, major sociology frameworks, which are systems of theories kind of loosely hooked together to help explain how and why people are the way that they are in general, and then with specific application and much more narrowly constructed sort of meso-level theory, as it's called, in wildland environments. So how do we behave if we are off in the wilderness alone versus how do we behave in the front country if we're not alone but with family or a friends group or fellow students or colleagues? There's a lot of good work, a lot of giant shoulders to stand on, as Einstein might say, in terms of figuring out and even predicting with some reasonably functional level of accuracy what people are going to do. People are generally, with lots of exceptions to prove the rule, behaving in identifiable, if not sensible, ways in public wild spaces or protected areas. And so we have large data sets to draw from. We have about a half century or more, 50 to 70 years of social psychological theory and field work to sort of underpin our discussions and ideas and questions to interrogate these things. And we'll go through throughout the semester. Hopefully I can sort of feed a steady trickle of papers that are major roundup sources describing each of these major theories, bodies of theories, and frameworks as they exist and as they evolve in the research literature, so that we can take and contextualize and pick and choose out of those for your thesis or dissertation. As with all of my graduate classes, I very much want this class to be highly informative, a great exploration at a very high level, a graduate level, a knowledge creation level of what's going on out there professionally and in the science community. But if it's not informing your thesis or dissertation, it's going to be hard for you to maintain your sanity. So I want to remember the human behind the grad student here, and we'll spend a lot of time kind of taking a critical look at these bodies of theory and applying them within the context of each of your work to see how it might be a useful theory or not, and being very frank and pragmatic about the usefulness of each of these for each of you individually. So we're also going to apply behavioral concepts to recreation planning and administration. Every year, about this time, the Recreation Planning Office of every national park, every wildlife refuge, and so forth, they are months into planning their approach for the coming year. You know that, tens to hundreds of thousands or millions of visitors are going to cross through that front gate or through some side gates or unregulated side roads and so forth, and they need to be prepared for that. So what are some of the, not just the theories they use to prepare an approach to deal with that and administer and manage, but what are some of the tool sets? So we have at least one ERP person, so we'll talk about GIS tools, both quantitative and qualitative, so social GIS, as well as raster surfaces and Krieg raster data sets and vector queries and so forth. And a whole bunch of other sort of fieldwork techniques as well, right? You gotta contact these people, you gotta interact with folks to understand what their needs are, what their intentions are, what their motivations are, and what their resulting behaviors might be. And that takes a lot of primary data collection. So I worked with a bunch of planning offices across the national park system and the forest system here in the United States, and we use any or all of those as kind of case studies to help inform what you might do with your thesis or dissertation based on what other folks in the professional field have done with their work. So that's kind of the one paragraph purpose of what we're going to be doing. We're looking at moving beyond the undergraduate level understanding of what and where and when are people doing, to the how, to the why, which is the hardest of all and arguably the most important. The why people are behaving in Wildlands is driving everything else, according to more than one theoretical framework. So that seems important. Our specific learning objectives are going to be kind of a breakout of that more narrative goal or purpose of the class. So we're going to have a critical evaluation of social and psychological theories. Some of them are going to be social psychological theories. We'll compare and contrast. We're not going to treat any of these as gospel. We'll talk about how professional researchers and planners and so forth, scientists and practitioners, regard theory, right? Do we trust it? Do we believe it? Right? These are all human constructs. We're maybe unearthings and organizations of human knowledge, and there's nothing that automatically makes it true or not, right? They're pretty good predictors in a lot of cases, but in our work in forestry or agriculture or geography, we're not necessarily looking at the center mass of humanity, the general human population, general American population or population of another country. We are looking at people in a much more specific context. And so the general social and psychological theories aren't necessarily well calibrated to that. So we'll compare and contrast. We'll have kind of a critical take on theoretical frameworks. We will read a bunch of research. So if you're not familiar with how to find publications through Web of Science, Web of Knowledge, Google Scholar, emailing a research paper author and saying, hey, can you send me a free copy of your thing because I can't afford it? We're going to get good at that. We have a lot of reading to do in this class, and it's going to be fairly deep reading. So whatever personal, or I guess maybe intellectual hygiene habits you need to have in place this semester for deep reading, reflective, deep thinking, uninterrupted thought about what you're reading. We want to start getting those professional hygiene habits in place early in the semester. We don't want to let this get ahead of us. So that's early in the semester. Third, we'll apply behavioral concepts to real-world scenarios. A lot of case studies, right? All of this stuff is only useful if you're going into professional practice, as far as any of these theories actually help you answer questions and get stuff done. So we're going to look at it through that lens after we've sort of introduced ourselves to these various bodies of theory. We'll see a bunch of management alternatives and go beyond the undergraduate level of sort of organizing those into broad strategies and specific tactics. Again, getting at the why and the how beyond the what do I do as a park ranger or what do I do as a conservation police officer, to the how have researchers answered this question and set up this predictive model. We'll talk some about policy implications, mostly dependent on the extent to which you guys and gals see yourselves going into policy. Policy is a strange beast that doesn't always connect clearly and directly and sensibly, logically, to the community of practice in science, right? So policy and science are not under the same roof always. So to the extent that that side of things is useful for you guys, let's go hard in that direction. If it's not useful for you, we'll leave that one aside. We want to, because we are ethical professionals in science and research here, we want to look at how do the conclusions you come to as a researcher, working on your thesis or your dissertation, how do those downstream of your work affect real people? All right, so this is a question of equity. This is a question of professional ethic. How do we make decisions in the lab that get translated to planning and management work in the professional space? And how do those decisions end up screwing somebody or uplifting or empowering people to receive the many benefits that they can potentially from wildland spaces? And this is a non-trivial issue, right? So there are always unintended consequences, always side effects. Murphy's Law is not that anything that is bad will probably happen. It is that anything possible that can happen will happen. And that has proved itself true as a general guiding principle over and over and over. So we want to ask, how could this thesis or dissertation, how could somebody read this and maybe mistakenly or even actively, maliciously misconstrue what I'm suggesting, recommending, putting out there in a way that might be harmful to other people? Okay, cool. Very important stuff. All right. Sixth, we're going to look at sustainability and conservation principles. Obviously, this is going to be a fundamental theme throughout, and is going to be kind of the justification for a lot of the work that we do, right? So I work with national parks, and if we have millions of visitors a year to our crown jewel national parks, within a couple of years, poorly managed, those parks can utterly, completely ecologically collapse. And so sustainability has to be baked into the process and the mindset and the reason for the existence of all this hard work that we're going to do from the start. We'll talk to varying extents, based on your individual research areas, about technological and data-driven tools, GIS, big data, data science, stuff like that. User analytics. I'm working on a project with the United States Department of Agriculture right now that we're using cell phone positional data from anonymized data from all people across the entire continental United States right now. It's a couple of trillion records. It's a lot. So big data, data science, we can talk about that if you want to. We'll talk, this is close to the end of the semester kind of thing, once we are equipped with the tools to get to that point. We'll talk through communicating effectively with stakeholders. If you are looking at going into natural resource planning, any kind of natural resource or protected area management, you have to be able to interface with the public. And you have to be able to interface with publics, plural, that may not think of you as their favorite person in the whole wide world. And that's okay. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, even if they're wrong. But we want to talk just a little bit about how do all the things that we've talked about so far up to that point in the semester, about 3/4 of the way through, how does that shape how we run a public information meeting or an information gathering meeting? Or how do we furnish our work to the world knowing that we might get dragged into court over it? As an agency, as practitioners or whatever, that happens. It happens all the time. And that's okay. Sometimes that's how land management gets done. So we don't want to fear that. We don't want to be surprised by it or caught flat-footed. But we want to be working in the reality of that milieu, at least here in the United States. And finally, throughout, hopefully if we're doing our jobs well this semester, we'll reflect kind of throughout on professional and ethical responsibilities, right? How do we do this well? How do we do it right with a capital R? Okay. Across these learning objectives, we're going to spend about 3 class sessions on each of them. That gets us right towards the end of the semester, with the notable exception of our very first objective, which is looking at the big bodies of theory. There are enough of those, and they're big and complex enough that we'll kind of be referring to those throughout the semester. So reviewing some of those publications kind of throughout. And that way it doesn't all pile up on us. We don't have to do tons of reading all at once at the beginning. We'll sort of smooth that out and even it out. We don't have a specific textbook for this class. I'll post a bunch of journal articles as we go on the course website. So mycourses.siu.edu is where those will be. I'll try to link everything from the front page, just the course announcements section, so you don't have to go digging through the content folders and all that stuff. I'm trying to save everybody a little bit of work and confusion on that. The grading system is just 90% and up is an A, so on the 10s for each letter grade. Generally for a graduate class, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on quizzes if it's kind of an arbitrary assessment tool and not maybe the right tool for a small graduate class like this. It needs to be a little bit more nimble and move forward faster than spending a bunch of time on assessment. So, in light of that, we want to have a very interactive class session. So, come to each class session. I know things get busy. Some of these research articles are going to be kind of thick. But come to class with the articles read. It's okay if you don't fully understand all of the implications of all of this stuff, right? That's what the class is for. But come ready to talk. Come with 1, 2, 3 things that surprised and impressed you about this particular theoretical framework. Maybe a couple of things that you disagree with or you want to call bullshit on. Again, none of these is perfect. Every one of these bodies of theory is a model. One of our guiding principles for this class is going to be that all models are wrong because they are approximations of reality. They are not reality. All models are wrong. Some subset of all of those wrong models are going to be useful. Okay? So our theory of gravity, we think it works pretty well at a meso level, right? Gravity kind of breaks down at the subatomic particle vibrating string level. And it kind of breaks down a little or a lot at a cosmic, greater than galaxy level. But at a human level, our theory of gravity is pretty good. Like, it makes pretty accurate predictions. That theory is a model. The mathematical model of gravity fields in space-time is just an equation. It's a simplification, an abstraction of a very complex reality down to a relatively small number of calculus and algebraic terms. So, all models are wrong. Some models are useful. So let's use this as our first sort of guiding principle for the class in figuring out what we think about each of these bodies of theory. And then coming into class and participating, discussing, right? Telling us what you think about this. Asking questions. Hey, Dr. Park, I didn't understand this part on page 3 of this one journal article. Like, I understood all the words, but I don't understand what the author means with this statement. They're just a little bit too esoteric or a little bit too opaque for me. So, if you guys come prepared with questions on stuff that you liked, didn't like, and maybe didn't understand fully yet, that's okay. I'm not expecting you to understand the stuff. That's why you're coming to class to learn, right? All right. So, be absolutely fearless in bringing up questions about stuff. And participation is going to be sort of the primary driver of this class's assessments, right? If you're coming to class and we're having intellectually stimulating chats about what we're reading, you're going to be fine. As we get closer to the end of the semester, we'll talk about whether or not to have a final exam. Again, it's a quiz-like assessment and may or may not be the right tool for a summative assessment of how far you've come. So when we get there, we'll talk about that and make a decision as a class and so forth. For class exercises, it's like every other class that you've ever had. Type your work, proofread your work. If you are willing, interested, or feel like you need to use AI assist writing tools like ChatGPT, that's a very handy tool, and you're certainly welcome to use it in this class. Simply identify that, hey, this particular part of my thought process, or my notes, or something I'm turning in, I generated with ChatGPT, and I'm good with that. At the graduate level and beyond, right, we cite our work. And if the AI is doing any of the writing for you, you want to cite that just like if another author is doing any idea transmission to you and through you, through your writing. So cite all your work. When in doubt, cite it out. Okay? Now, with AI assist writing tools, as you know, ChatGPT and so forth are simply multi-billion parameter, so a really long mathematical equation that tries to guess what letter and what word comes after each previous word. It is, for those of you familiar with computer science and computational linguistics, just a really, really, really fancy Markov word chain generator, which means that it will lie to you with a straight face. It will hallucinate, is the technical term these days, but you don't want to necessarily take anything that ChatGPT outputs for you for granted. If you use it to summarize a paper, which is a very useful and effective technique, don't automatically trust that. Double check, right? If you're boiling a 25-page, very important research paper that's been cited 20,000 times over the past 40 years, ChatGPT can give you a pretty good summary of that and help explain it to you, parts that are less familiar to you. But it's not always right, okay? It's useful, it's efficient, and it's not always right. So double check, double check, double check AI assist tools. We don't really have a requirement for this class for a field trip. We could organize maybe some video meetings with practitioners in the field, according to your specific needs and so forth, that can be a wonderful professional networking tool for you at the graduate level. Kind of a very, very miniaturized version of going to a conference and meeting folks who really want to hire you, because there's an absolutely critical shortage of advanced forestry people, advanced ERP trained folks. Not sure what your area of expertise is yet, but we'll get there. So it's good to get y'all's names and faces out there in front of people who are desperately trying to hire you, but they don't know you exist yet. So, in case anybody is wrestling with psychopathy, ethics are important in this class. Your work must be your own. Cite, provide proper and clear credit. You can... About the only way to really fail this class is by plagiarism, right? So representing someone else's work as your own. And most commonly, it's just, oops, I forgot to put in a citation for this paragraph. Sorry, I won't do it again. And we move on, right? Everybody makes mistakes. In close to 20 years of working in this field, I've only had to drop the hammer on one or a couple of students who were plagiarizing each other's work, and it was pretty obvious. And that was ugly. I didn't like doing it. I've never had to do that at the graduate level. But for anybody coming in from a culture or society, particularly Southeast Asian, where word for word verbatim copying a scholar's work and reproducing that verbatim copy is rewarded, in the American system of higher education, that requires citation. So, when in doubt, cite it out. Right? If there's a bunch of parenthetical or endnote or little superscript number citations on anything you write for this class or your own thesis or dissertation, if you have a ton of those, awesome. If you don't have any, scary. If we have something like an active shooter or an earthquake, we are in the secondary risk zone for the Quaternary Fault System north of St. Louis. That had some pretty gnarly earthquakes over the last couple of centuries. If something like that happens, don't freak out. We'll figure out what the situation is through the building emergency response team and then respond appropriately, whether that is sheltering in place or climbing out the windows and running for your life, whatever that needs to be. That's about it for the broad stroke stuff, the administrivia out of the syllabus. What questions do you guys and gals have before we jump into introductions and kind of customizing the class for you? Any questions? This stuff's all pretty usual, right? So, okay, cool. All right, so I know one of you so far. I'm super excited Sarah's taking this class. I'm guessing you're Zachary. You go by Zach?
Sure.
Either one? All right, cool. Zach Carter. Hello. Zach, tell us, you mentioned that you're coming in from the ERP program. Are you a PhD student, master's student? What's your area of study? What do you want to be when you grow up?
I just got my master's like last spring.
Okay.
And it was a master's in geography. Coming back, this is my second semester as a PhD student in the ERP program.
Okay.
I signed up for this class because my work is environmental behavior related. My advisor is Dr. Hurst, and my master's thesis was related to rancher outreach using psychological theories, specifically one called moral foundations theory, to promote sustainable ranching practices.
Okay.
So,
excellent.
This class for me, so
Wonderful. Glad to have you. So you started this past fall was your first semester?
Yeah.
Okay. And ERP is a 3-year PhD program-ish?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, cool. So where are you at with your proposal? Have you guys started that?
Not particularly.
Okay.
I mean,
Right.
I've been thinking about it, obviously, but
Sure.
I'm thinking about maybe pivoting a little bit for my. I did work with ranchers, for my master's. It was really fun, but it's very hard to group people for things like ranchers.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So, I don't know.
They're busy people, and some of them would rather not be bothered, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. That tracks. Very cool. All right, Sarah, how about you?
My name is Sarah. This is my second semester in the master's program. I graduated undergraduate program this summer. My research will be focusing on the Forest Service's definition of old growth forest, specifically coastal forest. That's liable to change because they just recalled that definition, saying it's impractical to have a nationwide definition. It needs to be more regional. So,
That sounds like a lot of work to make a whole bunch of regional definitions.
yeah.
And it can be a lot of work even defining what region means. We'll get into ontology and epistemology in a bit.
And I'll be working with Shawnee National Forest, hopefully on finding some sites and getting this figured out. So.
Cool. All right, so field work on Shawnee NF. Cool. All right. You must be Mohammed. Okay. What's your program? What are you studying? Who's your advisor? Master's versus PhD? What do you want to go into when you graduate?
So my name is Mohammed, but I do go by Ed. This is my second semester for PhD, and I'm coming from Education Department, Curriculum and Instruction, PhD program. I'm interested in something called place-based education, something that my advisor, Dr. Miller, does.
Okay.
And so place-based education aims to take recreational activity and involve it in curriculum. So my advisor asked me to look for classes that will help me build on knowledge on our curriculum.
Can
so
do.
I thought this class would be
Absolutely.
that.
Okay. Let's see. Do you know, or did you know, they just retired and moved down to Texas, but Christy McIntyre or John McIntyre?
Yeah.
Right on. They were close family friends of ours. Good folks. Yeah. He was on something like 120 graduate committees over time.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
told that.
So, anyway, they are no longer there, so that reference is going to go out of date pretty fast. But yeah, we have some friends in curriculum and instruction. Very cool. Okay, right on. So, what we want to do from here is essentially look at sort of groups of theories, and you guys are welcome to add to this list. So, Zach, I'm going to count on you to nominate moral foundation theory. Unless,
Some papers, I got you.
yeah, all right. Unless that's the last thing you want to talk about.
I mean, at this point, a little bit. But
Fair.
I mean, if it's nice, maybe I can.
Cool. So, we want to understand things like what's going on in people's heads. We would call this family of theoretical frameworks cognitive theories. How do people think? What are people thinking? Why do they think that way? And most of these frameworks have some kind of hook or lead or arrow in the box model that connect cognition to behavior. And indeed, in psychological circles, we have a whole field of practice called cognitive behavioral therapy, where if you're not feeling great, you look at what am I thinking that has me feeling that way? And what am I doing based on how I'm feeling, right? So, cognitive, behavioral, these are bodies of theory that look at what is happening inside the individual human being. Why does Ed, why does Sarah, why does Zach decide to go for a hike? Or how could we use, in this particular student's individualized education plan, their IEP, how could we use a particular walk or other mobile activity inside this particular stretch of woods, Thompson Woods, behind the building here, to affect or put into effect some aspect of that individualized education plan. So these are at the individual level, and that puts them in a psychological space. What are we thinking? What are we doing? And how are we feeling? Outwardly, how are we expressing it? Inwardly, how are we doing in terms of internal emotional state, different region of the brain than the cognitive part. And then if we scale up the individual psychology or psychological dynamics up to millions of people, or maybe just up to the level of one classroom at a time, right? 20 students, 30 students, something like that. Now we're seeing all of these things multiplied across a whole bunch of people. 30 people, 30 million people a year at some major relatively young national parks in China, for example. That's the sociological side of things, okay? So this is all, you can think of it all as one person, maybe one hypothetical person, or each student in a class, versus multiplied up. Now, it's not just a straight multiplication to get from one person to 1 million people. We just don't increase the slider to the right until the number matches the population. We also have to think about all of the sort of external prevailing forces, the context at the sociological level, which is going to have to place us very specifically in a time range. Because American society, for example, in 2025, is really different than 75 years ago, American society and culture in 1950. Completely different, almost unrecognizable, right? So, sociological bodies of theory, these frameworks that we're going to be looking at, force us or help us to add context. What's the weather like? What's the political climate like? What's the educational climate like for wrapping each of these individual million people in some kind of larger state or context? And then there's also interaction effects. So no man is an island, according to the poet. That is, even if I was teaching this exact same syllabus with you three versus you three plus 25 other students in this classroom, it would be a different experience because of the other people in the classroom. Their interaction effects, right? So at a very simplified level, we have one person, we have no interaction effects. We can pretty much simplify or oversimplify the system if we're trying to understand what this person's going to do or how we might affect what that person does in some kind of a natural or wildland environment, maybe a place-based educational approach. Right? That person doesn't have anybody else to interact with. We can pretty well tailor or model our system or understanding to that one person. But if we add even just one other person to the system, now we have to account for person A, person B, and the interaction effect between A and B. If we add a third person, we don't add or linearly increase our number of interactions or interaction effects to track, to model, to understand, to get out in front of with our individual and our sociological work, now we have a BC interaction effect, which is the same as the AB one, but for one other person. And we also have a BC, how do these three people together change each other, affect each other, interact with each other's cognition, affection, and behavior, or behavioral expression. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is draw some parallels between what is often a relatively very qualitative or deep or thick understanding of how societies, how people en masse work, how they go, how they exist together, right? It's hard to put that into a mathematical equation. For an individual person, we can boil a lot of things down to mathematical equations and do a lot of prediction. A lot of data science, a lot of what makes our modern day billionaires billionaires is that they have done this work, right? Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, they make their money on this. Understanding us, shaping our behaviors online, and then selling us ads throughout, and so forth. Okay? So, we're going to look at some qualitative work. Again, this is going to be interviews or insights based on interviews, semi-structured interviews, panel studies where you're having long conversations with people. Part of that deer study I'm working on with the United States Department of Agriculture right now is just sitting in a room with people for 90 minutes at a time and just asking them about deer and kind of seeing where the conversation goes, but for research in a very formal process. And every one of those conversations goes a little bit differently because it's a conversation. It's a semi-structured interview. And in some cases, not all, but some, we're going to model people as numbers because we have to. Come on in. We have to model people as numbers. We have to get into a place of not perfectly knowing every person throughout the time that we need to be interacting with them. We got to simplify things down a little bit, right? So one model of this classroom might be the enrollment list. It's a list of names. That's a very simplistic model of U3. But it's not useless. It is over-reductive, right? I don't know everything about Sarah by knowing Sarah's name. Right? As absurd as that and obvious as that statement is, that's the difference between qualitative, thick knowledge based on interviews and so forth, versus thinner but statistically modelable abstractions of people. Okay? Cool. So, with that, I will post on our course website the first couple of manuscripts we'll be looking at. I'm going to use the terms manuscripts, journal articles, research studies, theses, dissertations. They're all the same thing, right? Slightly different formats and lengths, but when I say any one of those words, I mean all of those words. All right, I'll post the first couple of frameworks for reading for next class. I'm going to start with the theory of planned behavior, which is a half century old, and it's got more than 10,000 studies under that particular umbrella. And that's going to be a good starting point for us, so check the course website maybe later today or tomorrow for that. And I'll try and get those up today so you can start reading on those. In particular, feel free to doubt anything that I assert through these publications. Right? The theory of planned behavior is just a model. It's wrong in some areas. It's like usefully abstractable for certain kinds of contexts. It's super awesome and useful for lots of things, but it doesn't work great at certain scales, and it doesn't work great in certain contexts. Okay? So if we're reading about this and you're just like, no, I don't think this works for me or for my dissertation or whatever, that's okay. I want you to bring that up in class conversationally on Wednesday so we can talk about these things and we can weigh the value and usefulness of each of these different bodies of theory and so forth. Okay? Cool. But feel free to Google around, ask ChatGPT for what are some controversies around this theory. What are some areas that researchers have noted this theory works really well at, and some areas where it's just not checking the box, and it's more work than it is benefit. Okay? So, let's start with the theory of plan behavior. There have been some theoretical models based on the theory of planned behavior, TPB, that are more modern, hip, sexy, up to date. And theory of planned behavior is itself a product or an evolution of another older theoretical framework from I believe the 1950s and 60s called the theory of reasoned action. Okay? So, we're going to be looking at each of these as if it's kind of a monolithic thing, but understand that every one of these bodies of theory is a work in progress, right? That's how science, at least in the Western reductionist model, works. That is, we have a theory and we use it as hard as we can until somebody breaks it. And then they come up with a new theory that addresses the part that's broken out of the old theory, and we just kind of move on from the old theory, generally. So we have, in the theory of, in the understanding of matter, for example, we had back 2,000 years ago, 2,300 years ago, sort of the irreducible Platonic ideals of things, like something could be made of gold or gold and silver alloyed together. We might call that an alloy or a compound called electrum. And you could separate out with modern chemistry gold and silver, but you can't sort of subdivide it anymore. If you keep chopping up the silver nugget, it's still silver in each of those nuggets. And that was how we understood matter at the time. And then as alchemy evolved into chemistry, we had the understanding that matter is made of smaller things than the fundamental elements that we think they are fundamentally made of. So we got the bread pudding model of atoms, basically, where we thought electrons were embedded in the soft, chewy shell of each atom. And then we got sort of an electron subatomic particle model, the orbital model, where we have electrons spinning around as very tiny electrically charged particles around a positively charged nucleus of the atom. So if you've ever seen rings of electrons around a bumpy little nucleus of an atom illustration, that's the electron orbital model. And then we got the subatomic particle model of, we have quarks, gluons, mesons, hadrons, etc., that if you blast individual atoms apart into their component bits, you get those subatomic particles, in like the Large Hadron Collider, for example. And then we replace that model of what matter is, what things are made of, with potentially, and this is getting more into physics than it is chemistry, the idea of things being composed of vibrating strings of something, matter, that are up to 11 dimensions. They're vibrating in up to 11 dimensions. And our brains have trouble thinking in anything above about 3.5 dimensions. So it gets pretty abstract. But superstring theory explains a lot of things that at the very, very small subatomic level that the electron orbital model just can't do. It can cover some areas that the bread pudding model just doesn't know about, just can't talk to, right? So that's the process of science. And so we want to understand with theory of plant behavior and every other one that, yeah, we're talking about a theory as kind of a snapshot, but we're really just talking about one cross-section, one snapshot in a stream of evolution within the theory and evolution beyond the theory, evolution leading up to the theory, okay? So as we're looking at a bigger theory, an older theory, like theory of planned behavior, which is useful, but a little bit simplistic and has maybe some embedded biases cooked into it, we want to understand that if you are jumping on Google Scholar and looking for additional references to explain to yourself the theory of planned behavior, if you get a paper that is 30 years younger than like the original theory of planned behavior papers, it's talking about the 30-year newer version of the theory of planned behavior. Does that make sense? So the paper I'm going to give you is like this snapshot. Other papers are looking at this snapshot of that same theory, same name. So it can be a little bit confusing. Just one thing to watch out for as we're going to deep dive into a bunch of theories this semester. Okay, so check out the course website for that, and that'll get us started. Let's rejoin here on Wednesday, same time, same bat channel. We'll get some good work done. And if you have any questions, shoot me a text message, shoot me an email, whatever works for you. I generally see text messages a lot faster than emails. So I'm happy to interface with you whatever way works best for you, but I probably won't be catching much after about 9 p.m. because I'm old. Any questions? I'm excited for this semester. This is going to be a good one. Any questions? All right, guys. Cool. We'll see you next time. Let's get out of here. Maybe get some lunch. And because we're meeting around lunchtime, if you guys want to, like, bring some food, chow down. You're not going to offend me. All right? Okay.